I recently got around to actually doing some math that I should have thought of doing a long time ago, and it has resulted in me beginning to spend a lot of time in the green dungeon instead of the orange dungeon that I've mostly been in the Stronghold of Security. So I'm killing Catablepons whenever I'm actually paying attention enough to pick up drops. And as it turns out, for my account build, Catablepons are actually noticeably better overall than flesh crawlers, which is what I have killed for probably 4 to 5 thousand hours. All right, now that I've been completely ragged by eating like 5 kebabs and getting my stats trained, let's get into this a little bit. So I don't usually make videos like this where I actually talk about the calculations behind the skilling metas that I'm working on figuring out, but I do a lot of that stuff sort of behind the scenes. I mean, if you're part of the free to play community, you probably have interacted with me about EHP rates and stuff because I've been a major contributor to various different free to play EHP rate sets over the years. This is not something that affects EHP rates at all because these are just an AFK option. They're not efficient compared to something where you're actually paying attention to the game. But the idea of this is just comparing them to flesh crawlers, basically, because flesh crawlers were kind of my default, very AFK option to do while doing other stuff IRL. And I've spent a lot of time doing those because, life is busy when you're an adult. And a lot of that time was not at the PC, and in that case, of course, flesh crawlers are better because they don't hit as hard and you get better combat rate. So if you're not picking up any drops at all, flesh crawlers are definitely better. But because of the improved drops of Catablepons compared to flesh crawlers, the loss in XP per hour and increased frequency of doing trips to restock on food is still very much worth it for free-to-play ultimates and probably free-to-play banker like Grey Helm or Red Helm or whatever you want to call them as well, but the calcs there would be a little bit different, and I haven't totally figured that out yet. So the differences between flesh crawlers and Catablepons is that flesh crawlers hit a lot less hard. Their max hit is 1, and their accuracy is pretty high, but their max hit is quite low. And Catablepons, I think, max like 5 or 6, and are probably similarly accurate. So they hit a fair amount harder. If you do a trip with a full inventory of kebabs, it's something like 2 to 3 hours, depending on your gear. Like right now, I'm not wearing a shield because it's not convenient for the other things I'm skill hopping to. But if you were wearing a shield and you had more open slots for food, it might be a bit longer. And the same trip at flesh crawlers would probably be like between 5 and 8 hours. So your trips are longer, but the time it takes to do a trip is only like 3 minutes to get an inventory of kebabs, reset your stats, run back. So it's not really a very significant difference. Flesh crawlers also attack at 3 tick speed, whereas these attack at 4 tick speed, which doesn't really matter that much when you're AFKing, but it's kind of noteworthy. And the last thing, of course, the most important thing is the drops. These drop law runes and noted essence, and they also drop scepter pieces just like flesh crawlers. And the only valuable drops from flesh crawlers are scepter pieces. And both of them drop gems, which are nice for a little bit of crafting XP, but they're so insignificant in the calculations that I didn't bother to include them. Another thing that is very worth noting is that these drop trout. So that makes your trips longer than you would think at first because you get a fair amount of healing through the trout that they drop. So I took this to a spreadsheet, as I usually do with trying to solve skilling math. This kind of stuff is fun to me, like solving a relatively complex problem of, like the whole big picture of the skilling meta of a certain game mode. It's pretty interesting to me. So I started by trying to figure out how much time is saved by each item that I get as a drop. And this is stuff that I could apply to all the other monsters that I might kill on this account as well, which is useful. So in order to determine that, I basically figured out what XP rate I'd be getting with and without each item in question. So the noteworthy items are law runes, bone fragments, noted rune essence, and also nature runes. But nature runes and law runes have basically a relationship with each other because you can turn 1 law rune into 3.5 nature runes. So I looked at the rate that you'd be getting for smithing, crafting, and RC with and without the relevant items. Smithing I broke into 3 tiers actually because you can either be getting around 9k XP per hour if you have no laws whatsoever, and that's the EHP rate for level 3 free-to-play ultimates, because they don't have teleports, of course. Using a little bit of law runes, so 16 law runes per hour, you can get 13k smithing XP per hour doing Disc of Returning and Falador teleport with Rings of Forging. And then superheating averages 25k XP per hour, including the time it takes to telegrab. The rate while you're actually smithing is 30k, but the overall rate is lower because telegrabbing takes time. And telegrabbing is extremely expensive on law runes, so it saves, it almost doubles your XP rate over the next highest method, but costs over 10 times as many law runes per hour. So the ideal is to be able to superheat, but the math that I'm doing here is basically assuming that you're in a deficit of supplies, because I am in a deficit of supplies for 200 mil with how much AFK combat I intend to do. And then for crafting, you get 14k an hour without supplies and 20k an hour with laws for teleports. And then rune crafting, there are 3 different options. The baseline without any supplies is 4750 XP per hour. If you have only bone fragments, then you get 6750 XP per hour. And if you have both bone fragments and noted essence, you get 9000 XP per hour. So basically I used this information as the baseline to determine the number of ticks that you save from each item that you get as a drop. So you save 166 ticks from 1 law rune if you use that to do Disc of Returning smithing instead of doing the baseline 9k an hour method. For superheating, you save 82 ticks per law rune, and I think over half of that is on magic XP, because if you don't do a lot of superheating, then you don't get magic 0 time, and otherwise magic will be like 40k or so XP per hour. So the calculations here combine both the time save off of just smithing and also the time save on magic. And then the crafting time save per law rune is 142 ticks, and then similar calculations for the rest. Bone frag save 70 ticks, Noted S saves 4 ticks per item, Nature runes save 17.5, and I calc that off of the 30k per hour smithing since you don't need to telegrab with the nets that you already get as drops. And then I got the numbers for bones and gem drops as well. So with these numbers, I took a look at some of the most commonly killed monsters for free-to-play Ironmen and basically tried to determine how much value you get out of each hour of killing them. So that is a combination of the combat XP per hour. So like Catablepons are slower XP than flesh crawlers. I get about 37k at Catablepons, 42k at flesh crawlers. So losing out on 5k combat XP per hour loses some time. So that gets factored into the calculation. But then each one of the drops that I get, which I've added up over, this is like 1 hour sample on average, that gets multiplied by the time value of the drop and gets added in. So if you look at the time value of the drops plus the time value of the combat XP, then you get this final number, which there's a lot of caveats still here. It's not like a perfect number, but it's just kind of a useful bit of information. So I basically treated the baseline combat rate as 47k because that's the highest you could get out of these. So if you did not need drops at all, there wouldn't be any reason to do anything other than that. Another thing to note is that these combat rates are pretty low, but these are assuming that you're not praying and taking some time to do trips for food and get potions and whatnot. So you could get higher rates than some of these, but these are the rates that I expect to get when I kill these monsters when I'm not really clicking that much or paying full attention. So for example, with Catablepons, the calculation is it's looking at the other sheet for the time values and multiplying those by the number of each item that I get per hour. So that adds up to some number, and then I'm also adding in the time value of the combat XP, which is basically dividing the rate that I get on Catablepons by the highest rate I could be getting, and then multiplying by 6,000 ticks per hour, because this is all in ticks. So for Moss Giants, it would be exactly 6,000 ticks plus the time value of the drops. So the time value of drops at Moss Giants in this case is like 5.5k. With these, the time value of the combat XP is a bit lower, but the value of the drops maybe is more like 4k or something like that, since maybe the time value of the combat XP is maybe 5k, something like that, rather than 6k. There's also two columns because this one is about using the laws for superheat, and this one uses the laws for crafting. And the numbers for crafting and smithing here are pretty similar, so I just used the crafting one. But the superheat one is quite different, so that changes the calcs a little bit for this column also. But basically you can compare these two numbers and get an idea of the total value that you gain out of 1 hour of killing each of these monsters. And this is, I don't know, like about 20% better on Catablepons than flesh crawlers, even taking into account the reduced combat rate. Another thing is that for my account in particular, I have an enormous amount of bone fragments, and I don't know if I'll ever actually use them because it's, at this point, many thousands of hours of rune crafting to use them up, and I intend to just keep getting more because I'm only like a third of the way done with melee or something like that, so there's still going to be lots more to come. So I may end up not even using a lot of those bone fragments. So to be able to trade off bone fragments for law runes and noted essence, which are both just more valuable to me for my approach to the game, that's a pretty big difference. Something else I would like to explore further is Ankous, because the time value on Ankous is second best only to Ogresses, and that's because they drop so many law runes per hour, and law runes are quite valuable, especially if you value them for low tier smithing or for crafting. Ogresses obviously did change the meta of free-to-play Iron Man quite a bit because they drop the most law runes per hour, and they also drop nature runes, and they also drop a ton of GP, and they also drop basically everything else you could ever want, including big bones. But looking at it this way, Ankous are actually not that much worse, and that's just because they drop so many law runes, and also you get some bone fragments and noted S for rune crafting, which saves a fair amount of time. So if there was a way to AFK train on Ankous, that would be pretty significant because, you know, you could just be able to stack up a lot better supplies than flesh crawlers or Catablepons. I've tested it very briefly and I think it is possible, but I'm not sure if the combat rate I have listed here is accurate because they don't aggro from as far away as other monsters for some reason, so they have to be within 1 tile of you to aggro. So basically you end up with more downtime between kills sometimes when they're wandering around the room and haven't aggroed you. And obviously they hit quite hard, so your trips are not going to be very long. So I think that your trips would be in the 30 to 60 minute time frame, even if you have max gear and a full inventory of food. So that definitely cuts down on the degree of AFK ability, and like in my case where I'm not wearing a shield, I don't even know, it would be pretty short. But more testing needed, because if that was a viable thing to AFK, that would be, you know, clearly enormously better than Catablepons or flesh crawlers. A couple more things to note before I end out this video. I have an alt here that has aggroed all of these giant spiders so that they don't attack me, because if I had spiders attacking me, then I would get a lot less drops per hour, and that would make them worse. So it's pretty easy to set up. I just have the alt standing here and it casts spells on the spiders, and they stand there and don't attack me. So that's a good way to improve your drops a lot. Another useful bit of information I've found if you're planning to actually try these out is that make sure you have the aggro zone plugin turned on, so you can see like this is the line I have to cross to reset the aggro timer. And I found that if I go through this portal over here after entering and run from the center around, it's a bit of a longer run, but it sets up the aggro zones to be much more convenient, so I don't even have to leave this room to reset aggro, whereas otherwise I don't think there's a way to do it without having to go through these barriers, which is slow and kind of annoying. And because I have aggroed these spiders on my alt by attacking them rather than letting them attack me, it's a different form of aggression, so they will try to attack me. Even though they're currently targeting my alt, they will try to attack me if I'm within range of their aggro at any time. So when you're resetting aggro up here, you can pull the spiders off and have to re-aggro them in the alt if you're not careful about it, which can be annoying. So basically I always just make sure that I'm in combat before I do the reset to this side, and then run back, and then I'm out of their aggro range again. So that way you aggro one north, then I aggro over here, and then their zone will be here. So there's a cycle between 3, and you just do a little triangle. It's also worth noting that the way Catablepons work is they drain your strength by 10 levels. Each time they weaken you, it drains your strength by 5, and I haven't actually tested these without 99 strength, but at least at 99, they would drain you down to 89, and then when you've regen back to 94, they drain you again. So basically you're always going between 89 and 93 strength. So that's why the XP rate is lower, is because your max hit will be lower also. And that also means that training strength here is going to be noticeably better XP per hour than training attack or defense, because when you're on aggressive mode, you get +3 strength invisible bonus, and that makes a pretty big difference. It basically means that if I were to be wearing gold Castle Wars boots, I would be able to hit 19s all the time, levels 89 through 93. Since I don't have them, I hit 18s at level 89 and then 19s for the rest of the levels. But if I was training on attack, that would be 3 levels lower. So instead, I would be hitting 18s until level 92, and then I would just get 1 level where I was hitting 19s. So that's enough to make a fairly significant difference, probably like 5%-ish on your XP per hour. So they're probably still worth it even if they're 5% worse, but that's still kind of a bummer. Obviously, you can't use strength potions here either because they'll just drain your strength immediately. So if you're potting at fleshies, they're a little bit better, but still these are probably worth it. Also, potions take time to make. And I think I said this already, but obviously if you're like doing something like Chrome Remote Desktop, or just, you know, coming to your PC every 10 minutes and then leaving the room, there's no point in killing these because you're not going to be picking up the drops anyways. So I still do flesh crawlers for a good number of hours per day when I'm not actually at the PC and just checking my phone every 10 minutes. Flesh crawlers are always going to serve that purpose better than anything else, I think. But for all the hours where I'm actually at the PC, paying enough attention to look to the side on the second monitor and check the drops, it's worth it. So basically what this means for my account is that I'll be back to training strength, and I train attack at flesh crawler strength here because that's what makes the most sense with what I just said. So I'll be back to working on strength slowly, but now the XP will be kind of 50-50-ish between these two. So it'll take a while for me to finish 200 mil strength. And this means I'll be getting a lot of law runes and noted essence and a lot of fragments too, though the number of fragments per hour on these is lower than on flesh crawlers, but I'm not really upset about that because I already have way too many. So if I stay here long enough, I'll be able to stack up enough essence to last me for finishing 99 rune crafting, and doing that with the noted S and the fragments is like 9k an hour, which is a lot better than 4, 5, 6k that I'd be getting otherwise. So that will save quite a bit of time on rune crafting, and all the law runes will be useful for, crafting or smithing, whatever I decide to use them for. So I'm not going to be in as much of a law rune deficit as I thought I would be if I kept doing flesh crawlers at the rate I was. So if you are playing a free-to-play UIM, definitely consider trying out Catablepons instead of flesh crawlers. They're surprisingly good given that they drain your strength by 10 levels. And even if you're a banker, they're probably still worth doing over flesh crawlers, but the difference between them and fleshies would probably be less, because bankers have better options for doing smithing and rune crafting without any supplies, basically. So yeah, I hope you guys found this interesting. Thanks for watching/listening, and I will see you all later.